Welcome from Cobra to Pigeon, from bhujangasana to a variation on kapotasana. We'll be prone, face down for the first of this, and actually when we come into Pigeon, we'll be in. Welcome from Cobra to Pigeon, bhujangasana to kapotasana variation. We're going to be prone in this sequence, so find a way to get comfortable in a face-down position. We'll end up using a couple of blocks, but after that, you should feel really creative about what props you're going to use for kapotasana, pigeon pose. I usually end up using a pair of blocks and a few blankets. So if you use a bolster or more stuff than that, just have it on hand, and we'll get to it in just a moment. But let's start by coming down to that prone position. Throughout this class, there might be moments where I cue you to have your face down, but my head will be up. I'm just taking care of my technology when I do that. So when you come into this prone position, I'd like you to start by stacking your hands, resting your forehead to the back of your hands, turning your toes under, and lengthening out one leg, then the second. So it sort of looks like this little caterpillar-like movement where you're drawing your leg bones towards the back of your mat. And then once it happens that you feel you are no longer bunching up the quads towards the hips, you can then come onto the tops of the feet. If this amount of plantar flexion for the extended amount of time that we'll be here is bothersome to you, then slide a bolster or a rolled blanket underneath the fronts of your ankles and the tops of your feet, similar to the way you would have it if you were on a massage table. And that way, it doesn't tend to be as much straight point back. And as you smoothed your legs towards your toes, begin here to press those elbows lightly down into the floor, as though to make the hollows of the armpits come even deeper into the body, but relax your shoulders when you do so. All right, so we're going to here slide the hands out from underneath the head, and you can put your forehead directly to the floor, rolling towards your hairline so that you don't end up just pressing your nose straight down. We're going to bring the palms flat to the floor, and the elbows end up pointing behind us. So there's no intention here to bring your elbows low and your fingers forward. Think of plank pose or all fours. You almost want to have, to the amount that it actually works in your body, those forearms vertical from the floor. And not every pair of shoulders, elbows, and wrists can contribute to that, but come up with what you can. For a lot of us, that means the heels of the hands are in line with the mid to lower ribs. Again, your forehead can be down unless you're peeking at the screen to see what I mean. And then as you have your hands to the floor, begin to really push them down, including in that the heel of the hand, the root knuckles, and even the fingerprints. And then think here of lifting the fronts of the shoulders away from the floor. Or you might think of it from the other end of the movement, which is like dragging your elbow points towards the back of your mat. And then as you hold this, those steady, sturdy, set shoulders, press your thighs, knees, shins, tops of the feet, and toenails into the floor. If you're using a bolster, do not lift your knees. Sink your knees deeper while you press your feet down, so nobody is lifting their knees. And then once you have secured strong, steady and set legs, thighs, knees, shins, feet, toenails pressed down, return to the shoulders, lift the shoulder fronts from the floor, and then inhale, exhale, lift your face from the floor, but hold on to a chin tuck, meaning we're going to do 3 of these very low cobras, world's lowest cobra, as I call it. But in none of them are you going to look forward or up. So you're going to gauge the lift of the pose, like how high did I go? Could I go higher? By pushing the base of the skull towards the ceiling. And if you're like me, you don't lift up very high at all, but think about peeling up one more rib from the floor. Base of the skull, presses to the ceiling. Thighs, knees, shins, feet press down, set the shoulders. All right, that's our first one. Let's go ahead here, pause. Take the hands underneath the forehead. You might consider alternating which hand is on top, but if you're wearing jewelry, rings, bracelets, that might not work for you. We're going to pause here, flat to the floor, and go back to those elbows pressing down. As those elbows push to the floor, can you draw the collarbone, so those outer edges, lift from the mat and push wider apart into your space? Can you sustain some of that as you slip the hands out from underneath your head? You can put your forehead to the floor. Do so with a chin tuck. Roll the forehead down so that you can take your nose off the mat. And then slide your hands back so the heel of the hands is in line with the middle ribs or the lower ribs. It's not going to happen the same way for each person, but could you bring your forearms so they're more vertical from the ground? All right, and as you press and set those shoulders, can you here begin to push the knees? So everyone's knees are on the ground. The shins, I get that your shins won't directly touch the floor. The tops of your ankles, the tops of your feet, your toenails, those all press down. And then begin to lift your face from the floor without lifting your chin. So you're maybe like cross-eyed slightly as you look down towards the mat. You can close your eyes, of course. But if you're going to lift anywhere in the pose, don't lift your legs off the ground. Don't shove your hands forward and in. Lift the base of the skull towards the ceiling. So maybe you pick up one more portion of your rib cage. Knees still pressing, feet still pressing. Inhale, exhale. Let's come on down, stack the hands. You might switch which hand is on top. We'll give it a breath or two. As your less effort comes into this pose, right, you're doing quite a bit less than you were a moment ago, we'll turn on one thing in particular, which is to drop those inner elbows into the floor. Like if you could think of what you might nickname your funny bone, if you whacked it on something hard, those inner elbows are pressing down to the ground. All right, let's do this in reverse order. Why not? So you're going to keep your hands stacked for your forehead, and as you're prone in a variation on Makarasana, crocodile pose, press knees, shins, thighs, tops of the feet and toenails into the ground. It's like you draped over your mid-thighs to your feet, just sandbags and heavy objects and thick quilts. And you have buried your legs from mid-thigh to the toes deeper into the ground. And then from here, lift your forehead from the back of your hands. But don't lift your chin. Tuck your chin. Tuck your chin. Lengthen the back of your neck. And then we'll set the shoulders, the hands, so you're already a little bit lifted. Bring those hands back. They're not forward, they're further back, and that is going to disadvantage you if you lift in this pose because you just push your hands down. We're trying to cultivate some back strength. So the hands are not in a place where you could easily recruit them to shove the floor and pop on up. That's why we do this version. Chin tucks, and again, if you're going to come up higher, you're going to sink the hands, bring the shoulders back and down, sink the legs, and then push the back of the skull towards the ceiling. All right, we're going to stay up on this one. And then I do find, it might just be my proportions, that I have to move my hands forward by a goodly amount in order to press my way up onto an all fours position. All right, so let's take the lessons of Cobra into our pigeon pose. Your right knee will be forward, your left leg will be back, and because it's really not a pose I teach that often, or you might just like a refresher, I'm going to pause the instructions and just give you a little demonstration. So if I bring my right knee forward, left leg back, I can stay up on fingertips, knuckles of hands, and kind of hover here. But we're going to try to set ourselves low into the posture. And for a lot of us, we can't sit down with levelness. We have to go crashing over towards the right. It's just a very logical outcome for the way most of us live in our pelvis, and for some of us, just the structure of our pelvis. So rather than coming sideways to sit on down, we put stuff underneath that right hip. So Here I've got my trusty blankets folded both into half. That makes a stack that's probably about 4 or 5 inches high. And then when I sit on this, I don't want to bring my knee onto it, but you could if that made your life better. I like to feel a little bit more grounded. So when I come to sit low, I don't have to go twisting, turning, tipping over to the right, but I can sit more or less level from side to side. The left side is unsupported. The right side is where I have a couple of blankets. So use the amount of height that is sustainable. You know we'll be here for a few minutes on each side, so don't shortchange yourself because we're going to be here for too long. All right, I don't care how you get into that. Some people will need to come through a downward dog just to get the clearance. Otherwise, you might just be able to slide the knee forward, push the left leg back, keep yourself level, and when you can no longer slide that left leg back, that's where you're sitting. So put in the height. Okay, so we're going to start low, and I'd like you to come down to your elbows. And as you come onto your elbows, press the elbows down and gently scrape them back on the mat. So you get an isometric drag of the hands going back, arms going back. And could that rebound and push your chest forward? I won't be cueing you in this moment just to hunch round and fall over to the floor, though that is a beloved version, which I've always just thought of as like a totally deflated pigeon pose. I don't love it because people just end up hunching their spines in order to chase down a sort of micro advantage, which is like you're stretching your hip. I would like you to stretch your hip if that's what you love about the pose, but to also develop a little core strength. All right. So you've been on elbows, and I'd like us to work up higher. I want to show you some stair steps to get up, which is one, you can stay on your elbows, but put those elbows on some blocks. So that would be a good next step. These blocks could probably go on the flat sides most usefully, but then potentially also on their middle height. And should you choose this, it's just where you were. So you're going to push your elbows down, scrape them back, pull your chest forward. You could also decide to transition from being on elbows to being on hands. And what you can do with that thereafter is begin to bring yourself even further towards a vertical torso by being able to push your hands down. Now, I'm always very cautious of offering this because I have seen 10,001 yogis interpret it as lock out the elbows, push up the shoulders, and basically just hang in a passive spinal extension. And for some people, there's no problem there. It feels pretty good. And so have it in your repertoire for the day when that is the thing you need. But we're working to really identify the shoulders and the back strength here. So instead of just like plunging the heels of the hands down, resting into your shoulders like they're a pair of crutches, I would have the hands come back, more in rather, closer towards you. Put a little bit of an elbow bend in them. And if you want to get upright, it's not because you lock out the arms, it's because you push the base of the skull further behind you. So at the end of it, my arms do come pretty straight, but I think that's very different than just plunging them down. You know, like pole vaulters have to stab down with their pull in order to vault. Here it's like you're like plunging your arms like the poles or a pair of crutches down. And what I want you to find here, that if you get further upright, it is off the virtues of your strength and stability and the lessons that you learned in Cobra that you can translate to a pigeon. Play around with it for another moment. You could try blocks on variable heights. You could have the arms come closer in. You could try for the base of the skull reaching further back. And this is all to bring you towards back bending. Wherever you are going to define and call your sort of end point, let's find that here for a moment. And I want you to push the left thigh, knee, shin, ankle, foot, toenails into the ground as you glide the base of your skull backwards. All right, and then let's go ahead and fold forward by some amount. That's usually just required to exit. Set props to the side. If you need your flow to get you to a downward dog, you're welcome to it. I usually just stay rooted on the ground and come on to the other side from a quadruped position. So I've moved my stack of blankets over towards the left because it's going to be supportive here to the outside of my left hip. And be prepared for asymmetry in the way that your body moves. So as I come into this, I'm always curious, like, is this going to be the same setup? And because my hips do operate differently, I do need just a little bit more support. So I'm picking up just the corner of the blanket and I'm putting underneath my butt just a little bit more fold. And once you have selected the amount of height, and my hope for you as a yogi is that you edit things as they change and as your understanding develops. You don't stick with one bolster, one blanket, 2 blocks for 20 years. Once you have made that setup, go ahead, come on down to your elbows. And again, if you're just chasing down a hip stretch, fantastic. This pose will get you that. However, I'm not chasing down one outcome. And I do think stretches are a little cheap. And I don't say that to devalue your experience, but you don't need back bend instruction, upper shoulder strength, back strength in order just to stretch your butt. You can do that in a variety of different ways. So we're making it more of an asana rather than just a really targeted piriformis stretch. Though it's in the mix, have you noticed? All right, so elbows press down, drag back and pull your chest forward. I often get questions about where do you want that shin on the left leg here. And if you could bring your shin forward, that's great, but it's not the point of the pose as we look at it in this moment. And if it's better for you to keep that left heel tucked underneath you, fantastic. All right, so can you stair step your way from being more towards a horizontal, folded forward, towards more of an upright position? So intermediate steps, they're all intermediate, right? Because there's always something else you can do, would be to take those elbows onto blocks. They press down, they scrape back, and you work here. You would be thinking of here pushing the base of your skull behind you as well. You can keep blocks, but use them for hands instead of forearms. And even if you kept like a seriously bent pair of elbows as you're on your palms, you could really be doing those Cobra actions. And even if you know you've got a bit of mobility and you could just come right on up, no big deal, what if you actually came up through strength rather than just popping up? So as I'm working here to bring my torso more towards that vertical position, it's not just because I'm taking my weak back and stretching my elbows straighter. Oh, there she is. She's upright, but it's no strength and power there. You can do the pose this way. I'm trying to get you to not do it. The thing that is impacted the most in this posture, this version of it, are my wrists. They're holding my whole torso up. No strength being used in my back whatsoever. So I'm going to flip that script so that I'm using more of my back strength. So I start back at bent elbows. I'm thinking of the base of my skull moving back. Yeah, it's a different side. I don't get to come up as high on this side. And as we work into this, can you set those shoulders back? Again, you're going to go higher. Well, if you're going to go higher, it's not because your hands can shove the ground, the blocks, your props. It's because you're going to draw the base of the skull behind you. When you come up to the point where you're like, that's it, that's the full back bend for this moment, go to that back leg and push the thigh, knee, shin, ankle, foot, toe, toenails down into the floor. The whole thing presses down into the floor like you're trying to swing it forward underneath you. It's not going to budge, but you're going to press down. You're going to move your skull back. And I wonder if when you get the hip and leg engaged and you think of that skull moving into the posture, if you can be more convincing of the spinal column to consider this back bending. Okay. When you're ready to release, again, for most of us, we've got to go forward by some amount just to change things out. And you can come out, maybe you're making time here for some sort of flow to a dog pose. That's great, but you've got one more Cobra on the way. So back to your prone position, hands stacked. Walk the legs out. Smooth the quads from the hips to the knees. Elbows press into the floor to push the ceiling, the dome of the armpits upwards off of the mat. Found something good in your shoulders? I hope so. Let's slide the hands back. Heels of the hands somewhere around low or mid ribs. Elbows come closer. Lift the fronts of the shoulders from the floor. The hands are not in an advantageous position to push you up. That is why the lowest Cobra is the best Cobra, because you really have to use your back strength. All right. Once you have those shoulders set back, keep the chin tucked and push the base of your skull towards the ceiling. Once you have your head peeled up, that initial movement, push your thighs, knees, shins, ankles, feet, toenails to the floor. And see if you can peel up another rib by the virtue of moving your skull back. At a certain point, your hands are actually contributing more, but you have to come up higher first to find them. And then when you get to the peak of this low Cobra, reinstitute thighs, knees, shins, feet, toenails, and press them down, and then lift the skull up and back. All right. You can go ahead and come on down, stack your hands, press those inner elbows deeply into the floor. And that's our journey from Cobra to Pigeon to Cobra, Bhuja to Kapota to Bhuja.